Some people move on from grief. Others build a life around it. For Elena, grief wasn't something that screamed or shattered windows. It didn't knock things over or demand attention. Grief was quieter than that. It lived in the pauses between moments. In the empty chair across the table. In the way silence settled into her home like dust that never fully cleared. For 20 years, Elena Vance lived in a house that faced the ocean. Not because she loved the sea, but because it was the last place her husband had ever been alive. Every morning, she woke up before the sun. Every morning, she brewed 1 cup of coffee. And every morning, she stood by the window and watched the waves crash against the cliffs below. She never said it out loud, but some part of her still listened. As if one day, the ocean might finally answer. It was October 14th, exactly 20 years since Lucas Vance never came home. Elena didn't mark anniversaries anymore. Didn't light candles. Didn't visit the small, empty grave the town had given her when there was no body to bury. She had learned that rituals didn't soften the pain. They only reminded her how permanent it was. That afternoon felt like every other afternoon. Gray sky. Wind pressing against the house. The steady, distant roar of water hitting rock. She was washing a single mug at the sink, the white one she always used. In the cupboard beside it sat a blue mug, chipped at the rim. She hadn't touched that mug in 20 years. Some memories didn't need to be revisited to stay alive. The house was quiet. Not peaceful. Absent. No television. No radio. No footsteps from another room. Just the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting seconds that felt heavier than they should. When Elena heard the sound of tires crunching on wet gravel outside, she glanced toward the window. The mail carrier was already driving away. She sighed. The mailbox walk. A routine she never skipped, even though she already knew what would be inside. Bills. Advertisements. Reminders of a future she didn't really plan for anymore. She pulled a cardigan tighter around herself and stepped outside. The air smelled like wet pine and cold metal. Her boots echoed softly against the driveway as she walked toward the mailbox. She opened it. And at first, nothing felt different. A power bill. A grocery store flyer. A winter coat catalog she wouldn't order from. Then her fingers brushed something thicker. Heavier. At the bottom of the stack sat a single envelope. Cream-colored. Uncreased. No return address. Just her name. Elena. Her breath stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. The world around her dimmed, as if someone had lowered the volume on reality itself. The wind died down. The ocean faded to a dull hush. She dropped the rest of the mail. Paper scattered into a shallow puddle, ink already beginning to bleed. But Elena didn't notice. Her hands were shaking as she lifted the envelope closer to her face. She knew that handwriting. She had memorized it once. Traced it with her fingers on old birthday cards and grocery notes and love letters left on the counter. The gentle curve of the E. The sharp, deliberate lines. It wasn't similar. It wasn't close. It was exact. Lucas. Her knees nearly gave out. No, she whispered. The word barely escaped her lips. She looked around, wild searching, half expecting someone to step out from behind the trees and tell her this was a mistake. The road was empty. The sky unmoved. No witnesses. Just her. And an envelope that should not exist. Because Lucas Vance had been dead for 20 years. She clutched the letter to her chest and stumbled back into the house. She didn't make it to the couch. She sank onto the floor in front of the fireplace, her back against the cold stone, the envelope resting on her knees like a weight she didn't know how to carry. Her mind raced, grasping for explanations. A prank. A forgery. A cruel coincidence. Because the alternative meant Lucas was alive. And if Lucas was alive, then the last 20 years of grief weren't mourning. They were abandonment. Her hands trembled as she tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. She unfolded it slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast, the moment would disappear. Her eyes found the first line. My dearest Elle. If you're reading this, I am out of time. Her chest tightened. The room felt smaller. She read on. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I lost that right the day I let the ocean take my name. Her breath caught. The ocean. Her fingers dug into the paper. But if there is any part of you that still remembers the man who loved you more than his own life, please come. An address followed. A cabin. A red door. A key under the third stone. At the bottom, just one letter. L. Elena stared at the page until the words blurred. Lucas hadn't drowned. He hadn't vanished. He had chosen to disappear. And whatever truth waited for her now, it was calling her out of the silence she had lived in for 20 years. Elena didn't sit there long. Shock doesn't last forever. It transforms. Into anger. Into fear. Into something sharp enough to make your hands move before your heart catches up. She folded the letter once. Then again. Not carefully. Not gently. She grabbed her car keys. The front door slammed harder than she intended, the sound echoing through the empty house like an accusation. The house had waited 20 years for answers. It would have to wait a little longer. The engine started on the first turn. Her hands shook on the steering wheel as she pulled onto the road. She didn't turn on the radio. She didn't want music. Music asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. The rain began 5 minutes into the drive. Not heavy. Not dramatic. Just enough to blur the world into streaks of gray and green. Her windshield wipers moved back and forth in a rhythm that felt too calm for what was happening inside her chest. The address burned into her mind. Blackwood Ridge. She hadn't heard that name in decades. Places like that don't exist for tourists. They exist for people who don't want to be found. Her thoughts spiraled as the miles passed. He left me. He let me believe he was dead. He watched me bury an empty coffin. Her jaw clenched. She remembered the sheriff standing on her porch that night, hat in his hands, eyes lowered. We found the boat, he'd said. Nothing else. She remembered screaming, not crying, screaming until her voice broke and something inside her snapped permanently. That pain hadn't been an accident. It had been planned. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't slow down. Anger kept her moving. Anger felt safer than hope. The coastal road slowly gave way to dense forest. Tall trees swallowed the sky, their branches tangled like secrets that had grown too long without light. The GPS signal flickered, then disappeared. She laughed once, a sharp, bitter sound. Of course. Her tires crunched onto a narrow dirt road. Mud splattered against the sides of the car as she drove deeper into the woods. The world felt older here. Heavier. Like time didn't move forward, it just circled. Then she saw it. A small cabin in a clearing. Dark wood. Weathered boards. Windows dim with dust. And the door. Bright red. The kind of red that didn't belong to nature. The kind that wanted to be seen. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She parked the car and sat there staring. For one terrible moment, she wished she hadn't come. Because once she stepped out of the car, there would be no going back to the version of herself that still believed Lucas had died loving her. She opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Her boots sank slightly into the mud as she walked toward the cabin. Her legs felt weak, not from fear. From 20 years of waiting suddenly demanding an answer. She stopped at the door. 3 stones lay near the step. Her breath hitched. She moved the third one. A silver key lay beneath it, dull with age. Real. Everything about this was real. Her hand shook as she slid the key into the lock. It turned. The sound was heavy. Final. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Not perfume. Not food. Not another life. It smelled like medicine. Like old wood. Like sickness. The cabin was small. Sparse. A table. A chair. A narrow bed. And in that bed, a man. Elena Froze. The man was thin. Frail. His chest rose and fell with effort. An oxygen machine hissed softly beside him. His hair was white. His skin stretched too tightly over sharp bones. This wasn't the man she remembered. But when he turned his head, she saw his eyes. The same hazel eyes that had looked at her across a kitchen table 20 years ago. The same eyes that had promised, "I'll be back before dinner." Elle he whispered. Her name, broken, familiar. The sound shattered something inside her. She took a step back, gripping her purse like a shield. "You're old," she said. It wasn't an insult. It was disbelief. A weak smile crossed his lips. "Time," he rasped. "It doesn't stop. Even for ghosts." Her voice shook. "Why?" The word hung between them. "Why did you leave? Why did you let me break? Why did you steal my life and call it love?" He tried to sit up and failed, collapsing back against the pillows. He gestured weakly to the chair beside him. "Please," he said. "Sit. I don't have much time left. And there's something you need to know, before the dark takes me for real this time." Elena didn't sit. She stood there, staring at the man who had ruined and shaped her life all at once. "You let me think you drowned," she said. "For 20 years. I know," he whispered. "It was the only way to keep you alive." Her anger faltered. That wasn't the answer she expected. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Open the drawer," he said. "The one by the bed." She hesitated, then pulled it open. Inside lay 3 things. A gun, a stack of cash, and a folder labeled with a date from decades ago. He closed his eyes. "You knew me as Lucas Vance," he said. "But before you, I was someone else." Elena's heart pounded. "What did you do?" she whispered. His voice trembled. "I made enemies." And in that moment, she realized, the man she married wasn't just hiding from the ocean. He had been hiding from a life that would have destroyed them both. Elena didn't answer right away. The words, "I made enemies," hung in the air, like smoke that refused to clear. She looked around the cabin again, really looked this time. The isolation. The locks on the windows. The way the curtains were always half-drawn, even in daylight. This wasn't the life of a man who ran away for love. It was the life of a man who never stopped hiding. "You don't get to speak in riddles," Elena said quietly. "Not after 20 years." Lucas nodded weakly. "You're right," he said. "You deserve the truth. All of it." He took a shallow breath. "My real name wasn't Lucas Vance." Her stomach dropped. It was David Kalin. The name meant nothing to her, and that terrified her more than if it had. "I grew up in Chicago," he continued. "South Side. My father drank himself into the ground. My mother worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on." Elena listened, frozen. "I learned early that being invisible was safer than being honest," he said. "So when a man offered me work that paid well and asked no questions, I didn't ask any either." Her fingers curled into fists. "What kind of work?" "The kind you don't come back from," he said. "Running packages. Watching doors. Being quiet." Her chest tightened. "You were a criminal." "Yes," he said without hesitation. "And worse, I was loyal." He coughed, his body shaking violently. Elena instinctively moved toward him, then stopped herself. "I didn't kill anyone," he said after catching his breath. "But I stood next to men who did. And I told myself that silence didn't make me guilty." He laughed weakly. "It does." Elena swallowed hard. "What changed?" His eyes closed. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." He described it slowly. A warehouse. A man tied to a chair. A gunshot that echoed longer than it should have. "I couldn't sleep after that," he said. "I couldn't eat. I couldn't breathe." He looked at her. "So I went to the police." Her eyes widened. "You turned them in?" "I testified," he said. "Against men who never forgive." He paused. "They gave me a deal. A new name. A new life. Oregon." "That's where you met me," Elena whispered. "Yes," he said. "And for the first time, I thought maybe I was allowed to be someone good." Tears slid down her face before she realized they were there. And then? She asked. And then they found me. Her breath caught. When? The week I disappeared. Her heart slammed violently. You saw them? Yes, he said. One of them. At the hardware store. Same scar on his chin. Same eyes. He stared at the ceiling. They don't forget, he said. They don't stop. Elena felt dizzy. So you decided to die. I decided to save you. Her anger roared back. You decided for me. He turned his head toward her, eyes filled with regret. I knew if I ran with you, he said, they would follow. And they wouldn't kill you fast. Her knees gave out. She collapsed into the chair beside his bed. So you let me bury you, she whispered. You let me live in hell. I let you live, he said. Without fear. Without shadows. Tears streamed down her face. I screamed your name every night for years, she said. I thought I wasn't enough for you to stay. He shook his head weakly. You were the only reason I left. Silence filled the cabin. Heavy. Crushing. Finally, she asked the question she had avoided since the moment she opened the letter. Why now? He looked at her. Because I'm dying, he said simply. Her breath stuttered. Lung cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say I have days. Maybe a week. She stared at him. And the men? She asked. The ones you ran from? Dead, he said. Prison. Old age. Time did what I couldn't. She laughed bitterly. So now it's safe. Yes. And now you want peace. No, he said softly. I want forgiveness. Elena closed her eyes. Forgiveness. The word felt heavier than hate. She had waited 20 years for answers. She never imagined they would hurt this much. Elena didn't leave that night. She told herself it was because he was sick. Because the roads were dark. Because the storm outside had started to crawl back in through the mountains. But the truth was simpler. She wasn't ready to say goodbye again. She slept on the old couch near the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and medicine. Every sound woke her, the crackle of wood, the wind pushing against the cabin, the shallow rhythm of Lucas's breathing in the next room. Sometime before dawn, she heard him cough. It was violent. Vet. The kind of cough that came from deep inside, like the body was trying to expel itself. She rushed to him. He was sitting upright, shaking, one hand gripping the edge of the bed like it was the only thing keeping him alive. I'm here, she said quickly, surprising herself with how natural it felt. He looked at her, embarrassed. I didn't want you to see this part, he whispered. She grabbed a glass of water, held it to his lips. I've already seen worse, she said. He smiled faintly. After the coughing passed, the room fell quiet again. Do you remember the first winter we spent together? He asked suddenly. She hesitated. Yes, she said. The power went out for 3 days. And you insisted we cook soup over candles, he said. You said it was romantic, she replied. It was, he said. Until the smoke alarm went off. They both smiled. For a moment, it felt dangerous. Like stepping into a memory that might collapse if she leaned on it too hard. You kept that blue sweater, he said. The one with the loose thread on the sleeve. Her throat tightened. I hated that sweater, she said. You wore it whenever you were nervous. She looked away. I was nervous a lot back then. So was I, he said. She sat at the edge of the bed. Did you ever think about coming back? She asked quietly. Every day, he answered without hesitation. Then why didn't you? Because every day I woke up alive, he said. And that meant you were safe. She pressed her lips together, holding back the anger that threatened to rise again. That doesn't make it right, she said. I know. The honesty disarmed her. They sat in silence until the sky outside lightened. Morning came slowly, like it didn't want to interrupt them. Elena made coffee. Weak, bitter, but warm. Lucas watched her from the table, his eyes following her movements like he was memorizing them. You always stir counterclockwise, he said. She froze. I didn't know I still did that. You always did, he said. When you were thinking. She handed him the mug. You remember everything, she said. I had nothing else, he replied. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. She cooked. He slept. They talked in pieces, small truths, safe memories, pauses where neither of them knew what to say. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes she cried in the bathroom where he couldn't hear her. At night, she read to him. Old books. Familiar voices. Stories that ended better than theirs ever did. On the third night, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. I don't want you to stay out of obligation, he said. If being here hurts too much. I'm not here for you, she interrupted. He looked startled. I'm here for me, she said. I need to understand how to close this. He nodded. That night, she dreamed of the funeral again. But this time, the casket was empty. And she wasn't crying. There was one question Elena hadn't allowed herself to ask. It lived behind her ribs. Heavy. Patient. Waiting. On the fifth morning, Lucas looked weaker. His voice had thinned, like it was being pulled through cloth. Elena, he said, carefully. There's something you still don't know. She already knew that. She sat across from him, hands wrapped around cold coffee. Say it, she said. Whatever it is. Say it before I change my mind. He closed his eyes. I didn't leave because I wanted to, he said. And I didn't leave because I was afraid of dying. She said nothing. I left because I was afraid of you watching me live, he continued. Watching me become someone who needed help to breathe, to stand, to exist. Her jaw tightened. I decided for you, he said. And that was my greatest failure. Tears slipped down her face silently. I thought if you remembered me strong, whole, then at least one version of me would survive. She stood up suddenly. You don't get to decide how someone loves you, she said, voice breaking. You don't get to disappear and call it protection. I know, he whispered. She turned away, pressing her forehead against the window. I buried you, she said. I learned how to live without answers. I built a life around the space you left. I never remarried, she added quietly. He opened his eyes. Neither did I, he said. The truth landed between them, not romantic, not tragic, just human. That night, Lucas asked her to bring the wooden box from beneath his bed. Inside were notebooks, medical records, and one sealed envelope. Her name was written on it. In his handwriting. This was for after, he said. But after came early. She didn't open it yet. Read it, he said gently. Out loud. I want to hear it once. Her hands shook as she opened it. The paper was thin. Old. She read. If you're holding this, it means I was wrong. Wrong to believe love means disappearing. Wrong to think silence is kinder than truth. I loved you enough to leave. But not wisely enough to stay. Her voice broke. If I had one more chance, I wouldn't ask for forgiveness. I would ask for honesty. She folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. I hated you for years, she said. And then one day, I missed you without anger. He smiled weakly. That's when I knew you were free. Lucas didn't wake up the next morning. There was no panic. No sudden collapse. Just stillness. Elena sat beside him for hours, holding his hand, listening to a silence that no longer felt unfinished. Later, as the sun rose through the trees, she realized something strange. She wasn't grieving the past. She was grateful for the ending. At the funeral, small, quiet, anonymous, she didn't correct anyone who assumed she was just an old friend. Some loves don't need titles. They just need truth. Months later, Elena sold her city apartment. She moved to a smaller place near the coast. Every morning, she walked the shoreline. Every evening, she wrote. Not about loss. About choice. About how love doesn't vanish. It waits for courage. And sometimes, it waits 20 years. She never regretted answering that letter. Because some closures don't erase pain. They give it meaning. Some stories don't ask what if. They ask why we waited so long to speak. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something you never said, or someone you never truly understood, leave a comment with the word, "Still here." It tells me you listen beyond the words. And subscribe, because tomorrow, I'll tell you a story about a woman who got married while pregnant. Her husband suspected betrayal. Her family suspected shame. But the baby's real story exposed a secret no one was prepared to face. I'll be here. Will you?